Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another CARE Arts Research Education Forum. I'm Eugene Darrenathan, and my guest this evening is a colleague who changed my perspective on music making a long time ago, immediately after my PhD dissertation. And true to form, I've been pursuing questions with him. I've been arguing and debating issues with him, and he's not stopped arguing back. So today, I'm about to engage on a topic that's difficult to deal with, but has to be confronted, and it's to do with age and aging, and how that has its impact on arts making, particularly practitioners who have become chronologically mature. So I thought, instead of posing questions at our guest this evening, I would invite him to tell us what he's been doing very recently. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Larry Francis.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Francis, you were saying that this is a new endeavor on your part, where you are trying to cross borders. Perhaps if you'd give us a short demonstration of what it is that you're trying to do first, and as usual, I will be asking you the difficult questions.
Okay. Let me just play fragments of this tune. Just a fragment of it.
Okay. Almost immediately, Dr. Francis, there's this unmistakable pentatonicism in the melodic line. There are aspects of your timbre which don't quite fit, and of course, you can correct me, the timbre that one idiomatically associates with the classical guitar that you're holding in your hand. And there are sonorities that turn up in this particular performance of yours, which one might say doesn't seem to ring a contemporary resounding or a contemporary soundscape.
Okay. So what happened here was it's largely a folk song I took from China, a Chinese folk song dating back probably in the 19th century. And I decided to add counterpoints, the pentatonic melody, Chinese melody, against counterpoint. And also I used the improvisational passages from lute music of Elizabethan period, dating back 15th century. And against it, I put a kind of tremolo to make it sound like a Chinese gu zheng, so that you can hear a synthesis of sound to become something different, which means I recreated a old folk song, Chinese folk song, with a blend of European Tudor music and flamenco. So this is just creativity. My mind is taking on new ideas and new
So let's ask the silly question. When did this endeavor become something of a serious endeavor for you?
Well,
how old is this piece?
Well, this piece is about, in the sense of maybe about 200 years ago.
Well, when did you decide that you would take ownership of this piece?
Well, it's not about ownership here. It's about trying to be creative
Okay.
I'm trying to look at
But
the
in
positive
this sense,
side.
when you are creating, it speaks to you and the level of experience and expertise that you have to try to meld them, to weave them into something that, whether you like it or not, is yours.
Well, I dare not claim this is mine, but I would say again, this is an kind of interpretation.
Okay.
But I'm using
But that readership is
ideas.
still yours.
Yeah, I think ownership is universal here. It's whoever plays it, you own the piece, because the possibilities of
Now, clearly, you're not
improvisation.
referring to the legal aspects of owning it. You're talking about how you,
Performer playing it,
and
me or
this
any
now becomes
performer.
embedded and embodied and expressive of yourself.
Yes,
Okay, then that is a current expressive endeavor.
yes, it's current.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess my
Absolutely.
question was, how current is current? I mean,
Oh.
how long have you been tinkling with this piece?
Over the past 8 months or so, I've been working at it.
So this piece is less than a year old?
Yes,
Or your version of events, your version of this tapestry is
Indeed.
about a year old?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned Elizabethan nuances, soundscapes. Where does that come from?
well, again, looking back into history, that when I studied Western music.
Okay,
and the
when
lute
did you
instru-
study Western music?
When, probably about 40 years ago, as,
Okay.
as a student in
as a
England.
student, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously, in the meantime, till the present, you have been actively engaged in creative forces and cultural forces that work in different domains around the Lautan Melayu region. And all of a sudden, a year now into your chronology, you've decided that you're going to try to rework an ancient Chinese melody with your long held past practice of a classical guitarist learning the Elizabethan tradition. Could you explain that? I mean, you could have taken something 2 years ago, but you've decided to go 40 years backwards.
Having said that 40 years backwards, it's a tutored course, which means you study in university in my first degree. I have never divorced myself from listening to classical Elizabethan music or lute music. So music has always been in me listening, but professionally I work at Malay music and the Lautan Melayu area and all that, but those are on a different level of both intellectually as well as in performance too, because I play both instruments, the lute and the percussion, Malay percussion. But here, to come back to the point, is that I think I'm always inspired by the earlier period in history. For example, medieval plays a very important part, and Renaissance too. So I took all these ideas and started recreating, looking back into my own life and my own history to make my music come alive now, and working with community projects on this music. So it's like a reborn in a new soundscape with the instrumentation and arrangements of sound and music, rather than writing about music or academic research. So that's my twist from
Let's
that time.
ask you that question. You've taken an ancient Chinese melody, you've taken Renaissance soundscapes, you've attempted to fuse them. Might someone not accuse you of reviving exotic sounds?
Well, I think music is very subjective. People have the right to ask questions and challenge my point of view. But music is always in the process of developing and being recreated all the time. It evolves music. So if music doesn't evolve, then I think there's an issue with whether music and the art is dead. I think, like age, No, we keep on evolving. So I think I'm not worried about a slant or accusation about whether I've taken this from X, Y, Z and I've recreated something that is not probably correct. But I beg to differ on this point.
So the alternative perspective of what you're arguing is to say that I've taken an ancient Chinese melody and I've taken Elizabethan soundscapes.
Yes, Elizabethan.
And I've contemporized it?
Yes, rearranged too. I've rearranged it.
In the present generation, right?
So for the modern years, for the Chinese years, Oriental years, to listen to the Chinese melody, Chinese people will recognize the tune very easily. I think I'll just say the title is from the song called 知道不知道, which means know or don't know. So it's very interesting from my point of view that the Chinese people recognize the tune, but they were very puzzled with the complex counterpoints and improvisation played by other instrumentation. And that made it more exciting and more pleasant to the new soundscape of today's generation.
You also speak about this piece being less than a year old. When did the idea of adding Elizabethan soundscapes come into play?
Well, it was actually, I never planned anything when I heard this beautiful Chinese folk melody, and I was thinking, what can I do to make it sound even more exciting for me? So I decided to explore the different sounds of the work that I've studied over my many years, and I thought the classical guitar or the lute, the Elizabethan lute, will be a perfect harmony to that melodic phrase. And that's why I explored even further, because I'm a lute player myself,
right,
and a classical guitarist. See?
And therefore, your expertise and experience comes from your higher education preparation in terms of being a classical guitarist.
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't see a problem merging the two in terms of one which is 8 months to a year old and another one that comes out of, shall we say, a 40-year-old closet?
Okay, Ken, yes, perhaps, yes.
Perhaps?
Yes.
Okay.
And then looking back also into history, 500 years ago, because the whole concept and idea and the sound, for me the sound is very important. Not the right notes as much, it's important. The sound, that you must recognize the sound, that it belongs to the time of the Elizabethan period, and the Chinese melody belongs to the folk tradition. And the flamenco tremolo belongs to the Spanish gypsy style of playing. So I think I've amalgamated in some ways.
You also spoke of the tremolo as a kind of empathetic resonance with the guzheng.
Yes, because
so in that sense, you have now incorporated more than just an ancient folk melody and Elizabethan sonorities. You've now added on the flamenco. So let's ask a more ridiculous question. Were you trained as a flamenco guitarist?
When I was living in the UK, I studied flamenco, and I also played in a few flamenco bands and dance and flamenco musician. I still play flamenco with a musician here, very quite popular dancer, Tanya Go. So I'm still at it. So I haven't stopped since I played.
So you've actually complicated the whole process. I thought we were going to just deal with the ancient Chinese melody and Elizabethan soundscapes. You've now added the kind of idiom that one finds in the guzheng, but also an idiomatic expressivity that comes out of the flamenco. Now, how many years does that involve? I mean, is it possible to do something like that today that you might not have done 40 years ago?
Oh, this is a very complicated question, but I think what I want to just emphasize, it didn't just happen. I studied Chinese music in my second degree, the guzheng and the erhu. So these were the two main instruments, both academic work and interpreting Chinese scores and playing the instrument superficially as well. So I can relate very easily to the flamenco and the playing style with the guzheng, and some of the melody lines that the main melody is taking can be also be played on the erhu. But I'm just looking at this piece as an amazing piece that brings in so many different syntheses of cultures and musical tradition to make it a whole without destroying the dignity or the sense of the beauty of that music and culture and tradition. So I'm very careful. I think it's not just anyhow. One have to have studied a tradition, especially thoroughly, in order to blend it carefully, or else you are doing disservice to the tradition and the culture and the country. So I'm very mindful of that.
Do you think that this piece could have been created when you were playing the guzheng and the erhu? Because by that time you were already a trained classical guitarist and a flamenco practitioner. It's quite possible that in your second degree, I don't know how many decades ago, that this would have been possible then, rather than experiment with it now.
Indeed, a very good question. But I think at the time, when I was doing my studies in Chinese music and culture, my knowledge of fusing cultures of the world were limited.
Okay.
I never understood how to fuse.
Right.
But it came with age, experience, more learning, more experiment, more exploring, more exposures. That's how the whole idea came about. So I don't think I've had
You would have
any
been
clue.
able to do it 3 or 4
I just had
decades ago.
to focus on the Chinese tradition.
Right.
And that's all I knew.
Okay.
See? I hope I made myself clear on that.
I know, I'm sure you did, because then by performing, you set the stage for you to keep experimenting and exploring sound worlds and the possibility of blending them.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
So that stage, STAGE again, becomes a platform for you to continue engaging in creative practice?
Indeed, yes. I think more so now because of my tremendous experience in the numerous cultures of the world, and I have more time to explore music making and how to rescore, rewrite, reorientate, and it becomes a new form of composition, I think, because I'm recomposing, if you want to call it recreation, recomposing many parts. Because most of the parts I have to rewrite again.
Okay.
Besides, the main melody was just...
If someone was to say to you, okay, if you are reblending, might you end up with an end product which might have sounded more like the sum of its parts rather than something that's more holistically emergent?
Explain, please. What do you mean by that?
Well, if we go back to the example that you talked about, ancient Chinese melody, Elizabethan sonorities, flamenco style sonorities, guzheng idiom sonorities. I'm sure this question must have hit you in terms of, am I adding one at a time so that I get the sum of 4 parts? Or is there something that's driving it there that is central to my creative thinking processes that I could actually blend these 4?
As I said, it's just an experiment for me. I found that by writing this way and playing to audience, people were excited about the new ideas I came up with. And that is a marker of, I think, acknowledgement of, yes, it's possible, it's good. If any criticism, they would have told me, but people seem to accepted this careful blend. It was not just
Some of many parts.
Yes.
Yeah.
See,
Okay.
so that's very
Okay. And
important.
I think the point that you also raised earlier was it came with more and more opportunities to experiment with that blending.
Yes.
I'm sure at some point in time there might have been something that you felt unhappy with because it felt like a failure.
On the different pieces I worked on, I just abandoned the piece because it may not work, but
Okay.
some may work, some may not work. Not everything works, you see. So we have to be careful. If it doesn't work, just remove it. Don't continue with it. I think many composers, Michelangelo himself said that, a perfect start will have a fine finish, but if not, he just will chuck the piece away. He'll just forget about the piece or the painting. So I do the same as a composer, recreator. I try and blend things and I try and do things differently. And if it's not good, doesn't sound right, if the audience don't like it, I just remove them from my repertoire.
So your audience becomes your auditor.
Auditor, indeed.
Now you did mention playing and trialing by trying. And you spoke about your many opportunities by which you engaged with other practitioners. Were all of them accepting of the classical guitar, or did you have another instrument that you could communicate your ideas with?
The classical guitar is a very niche instrument, and not many people can understand that instrument. So it's very difficult to communicate with the classical guitar because it's not a tradition in Southeast Asia and this part, Singapore. But the electric guitar is an area where I communicate better with the general public, and that's where I try and explore a different form of music to share with the audience and the musicians who work with me in community projects.
Okay, so let's have a sense of what you do with the electric guitar.
Okay, let me see. Oh, can I leave them this then? Okay.
Okay, so that we're on the same page now. You're playing, you're playing a lead guitar?
This is a lead guitar, yes.
Okay.
But it could be played rhythm too. It depends. If you strum chords, it's a rhythm guitar. And you play the melody, it's a lead guitar.
Okay, okay. That swirling of that sound from one pitch end to another reminds me of a Hawaiian guitar.
Not quite, because lots of string instruments, metal strings, slide guitar, pedal steel Hawaiian guitar, and electric guitar.
If you have a slide guitar, you need the other attachment.
Yes,
right?
The metal.
But it hasn't stopped you from just showing us in one gesture how you might, in the absence of that additional implement, try to emulate the sound of a Hawaiian guitar.
It's quite difficult to emulate that, but we can still try, and I've always worked on it too, by playing double stopping on the instrument. So, like that. So, can you hear that?
Right.
Almost like double stopping.
And that's interesting because you've actually deliberately moved your fingers right across the end of the spectrum to emulate or to draw empathy.
Indeed.
With the Hawaiian guitar slide.
Indeed. Pedal steel, more so pedal steel.
Okay. Do you actually end up playing Hawaiian band music with this guitar?
Well, not quite. My late uncle, who died at 99, who taught me the guitar, he was the Hawaiian guitar player, but
Did he teach you?
Well, he taught me the guitar, yes, indeed, yes.
Oh, not the Hawaiian guitar?
Not the Hawaiian guitar. He's a multi-instrumentalist,
right.
Uncle Michael that, and he played till at the age of 99, and then he just left us. But
so why did he not let you play the Hawaiian guitar?
The Hawaiian guitar growing up, my youth, it wasn't trendy to have play the Hawaiian guitar, and Hawaiian bands were dated at that time. It was the 50s. But my old uncle still loved playing those things, and he played with friends and all that stuff. But I think I was more attracted to the rock and roll era, the blues and the metal and all that. So Hawaiian guitar will not get.
Is that what you play with your fellow musicians? You mentioned community bands, didn't you? What kind of repertoire do community bands that you work with work with?
Interesting you should ask, because I have about 4 community bands, and they are all different actors playing with me.
So give us an idea of the kind of repertoire that works across 4.
Some community band musicians, they prefer playing in playing popular music, like To Love Somebody, or the oldies, and Hotel California and things like that.
Right.
But some community bands, they like playing acoustic sounds, and
is that possible on the electric guitar, that you make an acoustic sound?
No, because they come with acoustic instruments and acoustic guitars. So we play more sing-along, Paul Simon, Peter, Paul and Mary, all these folk songs, John Denver. So it's a different kind of community band. But I have another community band that plays a just acoustic sound, but imitating a lot of South American music. So, which means we use all double bass and acoustic and classical guitars to play. So they have a different repertoire, like Bésame Mucho, Historia de Amo. These are all that sort of Spanish songs, like even Despacito. We make it more contemporary.
Okay.
So there are different actors and different people like different music.
Right.
So you use different instruments. So this will not sit well in folk, like you play folk song. It may not sound good, you see. It doesn't sound right. So it's just meant for different kind of music. And we have to understand certain instruments will not fit. For example, the classical guitar. Try to play rock and pop will not sound very nice.
Okay.
So that's important to remember as musicians.
When you work with these 4, and I'm sure since you speak of a 4-decade experience, classical guitar, flamenco guitar, Chinese instruments, as you say, were you not playing music with people you knew in concert platforms? And when I mean concert platforms, I don't mean stadium. I mean concert platforms. It could range from a pub to a small setting. That spoke of your experience growing up influenced by Uncle Michael.
Yes. The people who listen to kind of acoustic music and with the classical guitar or flamenco guitar, the clientele, very few people like to listen to such music. So my focus has changed to the electric guitar because of the limited audience that want to appreciate or will appreciate such music. And I think it's sad that who was trained more on the classical guitar, never got a chance to use my classical guitar in community project, in the bigger community projects or in concerts and shows, because people are not really interested in the sounds of the classical guitar and the flamenco guitar. They find it very noisy. So, but they like this.
Okay. I gather that this instrument was also quite useful for you as a musician in apprenticeship in popular music situations.
Yes.
As a paid performer. Talk to us about that.
In my younger days, as a teenager, for the past 10 years, as a teenager to in my middle mid-20s, late 20s, before I went to study music in university. The rock guitar or the electric guitar was one of the iconic instruments, and I had lots of band and made lots of money by just playing this instrument, and this paid for my university education too, to some degree. So this instrument during the 70s and 80s were amazing instrument for making money, because the people really wanted to listen to popular music and rock, and they paid to listen.
Who are these people?
Well, there were two kinds. One is the expat community here, and the other one was the local music aficionados who love music. But the Americans, and the third community, they only wanted country and bluegrass music. So when I left Singapore for the UK, I think the oil business in this part of Southeast Asia also faded away, and country music and bluegrass and Cajun and all that disappeared too. So,
but you're speaking of three genres, and I don't hear your ingratiation into these genres, unless you're saying Uncle Michael taught you all those three, or this is something that you had to sort of work yourself out of a comfort zone. So if people were listening and you knew that the people were requesting for these genres, that you would have to stretch yourself?
Yes, Uncle Michael was only able to teach me popular music in the sense of the popular music of the 1960s and 50s he was listening and playing. And later on, he shared with me some of the old style of combo band playing. So it's fascinating. But the other genres, like bluegrass and Cajun, were things that I studied when I was doing my MA in Queen's University. So that's where I had lectures on Cajun and bluegrass.
Okay.
So country music too.
If I scroll back a little bit, you were offered some handsome rewards for playing country and western, Cajun and bluegrass before your graduate program, right? How did you get into that? Because that was not,
yes.
if I hear you correct, that was not part of your
Yes.
CV.
That's right. It was great that the American community, especially the American business folks here, they gave me CDs they called vinyl recordings and tapes for me to listen and play, because there's no media music and no internet. So I learned a lot from these people by intently listening to vinyl, picking the song, and then the songs, and working with musicians and learning all the parts, and then playing and performing to Americans in American club and private homes and private places and gigs.
Right.
So that's how I managed. But I didn't know the complexity of these traditions until I went to study, and that's where it became more pronounced and more subtle in my deliverance. I think that's where I learned.
But clearly your audience didn't seem to reject your version.
Oh, yeah, because I imitated almost note for note at that time.
Okay.
I didn't reinvent things or recreate. So I didn't know the art of recreating or reinventing or to have my own style. I regurgitated.
Okay.
We call it imitation in music.
Right, but you can't deny the fact that that level of training, if you want to call it that, right? Intently, as you say, listening to the vinyl, gave you an opportunity to soak up the sounds, to imitate and to copy first, because it seems that your audience wanted an imitation of, rather than your version of what they gave you.
Yes. The audience knew that I couldn't recreate anything different, and I can only imitate. So they were very pleasant and accepting. Whatever I produced, they accepted it. But I know in bluegrass, country, and Cajun music, you don't produce note for note, imitate. You have to recreate every time you produce it, you perform. It's different. So I couldn't do it.
But that's an interesting, that's an interesting epiphany for you, because when you were regurgitating it, to take a leaf out of your page, and being paid for it, which is not a bad exercise,
absolutely,
right, of regurgitation, and to have that epiphany much later, could you not also see the benefit of ingratiating yourself in the genre intuitively and in muscular memory terms, for you to say, oh, okay, there's a complexity here I never encountered, because all I was doing at the time was to get my body used to the genre?
Yes. Yes, but the fact here remains that I didn't know how to recreate it. So only when I begin to study the real tradition, that's where we learn how to jam, say, Cajun or country music, and how to imitate also not just the guitar parts, but for example the slide guitar, for example, I play here, if I demonstrate. This is a typical, very typical G chord, just strumming, and very typical run. But then I learn how to imitate the slide guitar, and goes. So you can hear that was a slide guitar part, not the guitar part. But so I imitated, only being exposed and studied the music of the tradition. I begin to incorporate different ideas, different way of playing, and different way of looking at a piece of music and tradition, standing back and say, oh, this is how they do it. Because eventually you work with all these real musicians from that tradition, which I worked with, and I said, oh my God, I never knew it was like that. So I've learned through imitation, which was the first school of learning, and the best learner is a vinyl or the CD teacher who taught me how to play, through listening intently, imitating or regurgitating it, and eventually jamming with a real musician, and you find, wow, world of difference. And that's an amazing blend of learning. So it's a great learning in that sense.
So you had two epiphanies, one with the vinyl, and one in graduate study.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Let's ask the awkward question. If you were playing so many styles, and if you were playing so often and so frequently, was there ever the prospect of injury in the process?
Needlessly, because injury happens with repetitive playing and overplaying an instrument. It goes for typists, and when you use a computer or any profession, it's an occupational hazard. So injury will happen.
Did you?
Doubt. Yes. Yes, of course. I suffered from carpal tunnel twice.
Okay.
Severe carpal tunnel, which means unable to play an instrument. So what did I do?
What did it feel like to suddenly feel like you'd almost had a death sentence imposed on you?
Yes, it was terrifying, terrifying.
How long was that?
It went on for nearly about 2-3 years, but on and off. It came back and went on and off. But the point to remember is I always look for alternative. So I went on to learn the drums, the drum kit, and the keyboard. So carpal tunnel doesn't affect a different movement of muscle and strokes, plonking on the piano. So I changed and learned a new instrument, or 2 new instruments.
So which means that if you could sample yourself, you could be a 4-piece band?
Oh, I do that all the time, yeah, recording, playing different parts. Yes.
Yeah. And if you're talking about your teenage years, it takes you way back 40 years, doesn't it? And yet, when you play the electric guitar, you seem to derive quite a bit of joy taking your past into the present?
It's inevitable, right? Because the music you play...
Well, you could make it cosmetic. I mean, you know the style, you've studied the style. You could just play perfunctorily.
Not really, because I look at myself when I play an instrument, whether it's a shakuhachi or it's the drum kit or whatever, I become an extension of the instrument. I become the carrier of that instrument and the sound. So I become one. So the resonating sound of the instrument is also from my body, vibrates in me. So the energy is reproduced, and the lines I derive, the lines I play, are exactly from my own energy. And it's just transported.
Even though it's past energy?
Yes, there's no past energy. It's always coming back.
Unless we talk about muscular memory.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. You've not only played the electric guitar, but it seems to me that you've also learned wind instruments.
Yes.
And that I thought was quite telling because, well, you talked about how you came through injury or came out of injury by playing another instrument which didn't affect you quite as severely as you would have had on the plucked string instruments, like the classical guitar or the electric guitar. So in the middle of your injury, did the wind instrument come into play?
Not really. The wind instrument which I play, I studied the flute in university as well, but I eventually started learning this instrument called the shakuhachi, a Japanese end-blown flute. The Chinese have a name for it. I think Thiao.
Okay.
Thiao, it's a similar thing. I think it's a Chinese importation into Japan. But this instrument became a kind of medicinal instrument in the sense that when I was studying Japanese music at, I think, I can't remember which degree, yes, both my first degree, second degree as well, and privately, with Yoshikazu Iwamoto, a fabulous player of this instrument. I tried to use it to cure myself from asthma because I had breathing problem and asthma. And Professor Yoshikazu said that this can help me to breathe better. So I used it, which is over there, and I play lots of this instrument. I practice a lot on it because it helps me.
So are you saying now the shakuhachi prevented you or offered you an alternative to inhalers?
Absolutely.
So you didn't have to use an inhaler?
Or steroids. I used to take steroids for my asthma.
Right. So in both senses, injury provided you alternative pathways.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
To get past those moments. And so in that sort of 2 to 3 year period of wilderness, so to speak, where you stayed away from your heartstrings.
The strings, all string instruments. All.
And you found yourself back into it. Was it hard to get back into your heartstrings?
Yes, I was hesitant. I was hesitant because I didn't want the carpal tunnel to come back again. I refused to do the surgery. I had
But was there fear that if you returned to the electric guitar and the classical guitar, that you'd be inviting injury back again?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because it's repetitive playing and the damage was quite severe. The doctors were quite good and they said it's 50-50 chances. But when I went to acupuncture, TCM, it relieved the thing for about 6 months and it comes back again. So there was no cure, in other words.
So are you still afflicted by...
time and again, yes.
Time and again.
Time and again.
And then how have you learned to cope with it?
Well, I just don't play. For 2-3 weeks, it'll get better and play other instruments. So that's the best way to cope with damage to your system.
So it's an interesting way to cope with injury, to become a multi-instrumentalist.
I think so. It's very important. Not only for musicianship, but I think you must have a passable knowledge on many other instruments, but a really thorough knowledge on at least one of your main instrument.
But you know, the shakuhachi demands a completely different discipline and a different form of readership. So perhaps you could show us some of that?
I can't play it here today because I can show you the instrument and the score, and maybe I can submit my recordings in another time. Oh yes, thank you. Can you bring the score in there to show? Yeah, but this is how the instrument look, and I have some recordings of me playing. It's better sounding than here, and yeah, maybe for the video to take it score. This is how the score looks, Japanese notation, and you read in Japanese notation, not Western notation, and it gives you a different. I have transcribed.
That must have been a steep learning curve.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. But
which was harder, the reading or the performing?
The performing. The reading is quite easy. The performing, because you really need to get the nuances right in Japanese culture and music, a tradition, as I said before. You cannot do disservice to the tradition by playing as you like. You have to follow the rules and regulation of the tradition. So it's something that we have to keep that in mind and not just do disservice to traditions.
So it sounds to me like if we look at a summary of the things that you've done, I'm sorry, the things you are doing,
okay.
There seems to be no stopping you.
I will only stop when I take my last breath, but I don't think so.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves, you know. But I think in that situation, what seems to have gotten you going, and I'm thinking of what you started off by saying, you're being creative. And so what's kept you timeless and ageless is about your commitment to creative endeavor.
I will never allow age. Age to me is a perception. It's in the mind. But for me, it's just to continue searching for ideas, new sound, new knowledge, new experiments, by being motivated. I think that's a very important word. Motivation has to come, and then there must be a goal, a purpose. So the motivation goes into the purpose, where I prepare for concerts. So there's a motivation to practice, motivation to write music, motivation to create, because at the end I have to teach performers to back me and to perform for audience. So it's an amazing way for me to deliver beyond just talking about age and worrying about age.
Would you then say that what prefaces motivation in your practice is curiosity?
Curiosity may not be one, but I think the determination and perseverance, and I think interest. I'm just
But if you
interested.
aren't curious, then what would motivate you?
Easy. Audience. I like to be sharing my art with audience. So the audience, the listener inspires me. I don't write for myself only. I write for the listeners, the audience. You don't write music for yourself. You don't play music just for yourself only. You share your music. Music is love, and music is share for me. But many people think going for the exams, and I remember playing all these exam pieces, the piano exams. It's just for the examiner, that's it. Then don't play it anymore, those pieces. But for me, I write, compose, recreate, reinvent, to share with my fellow musicians and the audience and the listener and the critique as well.
If I may close, and you can agree or disagree with me, you remind me of a line from T.S. Eliot. You are the music while the music lasts.
Beautifully said. I think so. I am indeed the music, and I'm the instrument as well, the transducer of the music, because music is just there, but you need an instrument. My body is the transducer with the instrument as an extension of my whole personality.
And let's not forget your age.
Yes, I'm 70 years old.
Thank you, Dr. Francis.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Eugene. Thank you.
So thank you very much, all of you who've been patient with a very resistant practitioner who's just made it so difficult to elicit and extract anything out of him. Phil, thank you for your question about the problem of ageism. And I think what the problem actually is about the way in which age is considered in institutional discourse. Age is something that is considered a sign of weakness, a sign of incompetence, a sign of growing senility and possibly dementia. And nothing could be further from that than those who have been intrinsically motivated in their passionate discourse and their discursive practice. Thank you for that reminder that ageism is a problem that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. And you know what I think? I think that in our institutional discourse, we have the official age of retirement. I mean, what are people trying to say? Is that look, really, you've passed your sell-by date, and you should quietly exit from stage right. I mean, what if we were to live in a world and work in institutions where retirement was just not a word or a concept that came up? I mean, it's got more to do about I mean, I always get a sense that that when we reach retirement age, we're no longer employable, and that that's kind of like a sad reflection on life. Is that I mean, who wants to go around telling people that I'm not employable anymore? I mean, it's just a terrible thing, because it doesn't pay it. Not that anyone needs you to pay homage to what you've done, but it's just like saying your potential as a human being, your the possibility of you creating and sort of writing for an audience and performing for an audience and receiving that critique and all of those things no longer applies to you anymore. You're not eligible for those kinds of things because you're not employable. And I find that to be such a negative and such a difficult discourse, is that I think that we'd be in a much better place if we were to stop thinking in those terms.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Are there any questions from the floor, please?
Could I just answer?
Yes, please go ahead, Larry.
I want to, Phil, thanks very much for the question. I'd like to take this question from Phil, but I will rephrase it in a different way. I'm looking at what is the relationship between age and the arts. I think this is a very important dichotomy, age and the art. Here, creativity, we're talking about the arts. Age is a process that is incessantly evolving, I think. It's just bodily functionality. However, in our area of arts or creativity, it's a more complex art and craft. Largely, it's through acquisition. You acquire it. And ageism or age helps you to acquire as you go on, because the maturity comes with the process of acquisition. So in the nutshell, what I'm saying is that we're looking at the triangulation. One, as we progress in age, in that triangulation, we are looking at in order to understand, for example, music, take music, we must have a great understanding. Music should be understood first, intellectually, I think. Intellectually, theory, philosophy, blah, blah, blah. then the other end of it is music must be experienced socially. And finally, music must be explored intuitively in the sense of emotions, expressed emotionally, I think. So the triangulation helps us. And this can only be acquired through the process of time and maturity as we age and we become, I believe, more productive in implementing these new ideas and sharing this new level of creativity.
With all due respect, Larry, those ideals work very well with alcoholic spirits and artworks.
Well, I don't agree with the point you're raising, Eugene, because here I'm talking about serious artists, not about drugs or alcohol.
You think alcoholic spirits, which are 100-year-old whiskey, single malt, and the Mona Lisa have no value in their...
Well, I mean, this is very subjective, right? I think lots of musicians are good musicians, are teetotalers. They just practice the art as spiritual art. So I think the artificial inducer like alcohol or drugs or whatever you call it, I think they are not really part of my thinking. I mean, some musicians may use it or creative people, but I think a serious artist has to think in the triangulation of expressing music sort of intellectually and understanding music and feeling the music. It's really a complicated mess, which you need time to study. But I think this alcohol and drugs are very superficial.
I think the point that Larry, I think the point that Eugene is trying to make is this: is that if you went into a liquor store, you would be attracted by the 100-year-old vintage whiskey as opposed to just buying one that had been made last year. So the idea being is that age is not a liability; it's actually something that is to be revered almost, and that the older the musician gets, the better they become.
I think so. I think so. Mm-hmm.
I think so too. Until you get to the point, where you can no longer perform or do the kinds of things that I think would do justice to your art, and so look, I mean, it's great that you are able-bodied and that you're compos mentis and you can talk intelligently at the young age of 70. I mean that's all fantastic, but there was a thing that happened recently that was very disturbing for me. I'm sure of the Canadian American singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell. She's been very sick over the years, but recently they managed to get her out of bed and to go onto stage and to perform, and I kind of like felt to myself, she's not doing herself justice anymore. It would be better if she, because she's ill and because all the rest of it, it would be better if she were not to do these kinds of things, because it doesn't kind of like help with her legacy, as it were.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Phil, you've raised that specter of institutional discourse and discursive practice. Yeah. And I think this is what happens, it's Joni Mitchell. So we've got to stand her up and we've got to stick her around so that she appears to be ageless in front of everyone else because she's still standing, and sometimes when you do think of institutions who are now included, who we should now include as commercial endeavor, and spin doctoring, besides institutional sinecures like the Grammy Awards or the Lifetime Awards, where in order for you to be visible and relevant, you've got to appear in whatever shape and form.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that's sad, personally, but but that's just my point of view. I'm interested to know what other people think.
Sure, please. Questions? Anyone? Raised hands? You can throw in a comment on the chat. I do wonder how visual artists cope with art and age. Any thoughts from our art colleagues who are here?
Maybe they're too old to say anything. I don't really know. I mean,
I'm thinking about the up and coming ones who are contending with the 90-year-olds who are still around.
Yeah.
And wondering what do we do in a situation like that? What do we say about these old folks who we revere or maybe revile, but cannot say anything because they've become institutions in and of themselves?
Can I just add something? Could I say about the Beatles? I mean, the Beatles were formed in 1960. And I think they broke up on the 10th of April, 1970, 10 years. But you can see experience and aging has brought about changes and maturity in their musical thinking. For example, if you listen to the Beatles in 1960s, early 60s, their soundscape were largely structured on American 12-bar blues structures. But towards the end of their career, till the end of the breakup of the band in 1970s, the level of musicality, the level of musical competence they attained were unbelievable. This is amazing history in progression of how, with experience, exposure, and aging, a group matures as they go along. And I think this is something to look at as well. The example from the Beatles.
Yeah, sure. What's interesting about that, Larry, is that when the Beatles, some of those early hits from the Beatles were simply just them trying to sound like sort of other people, sort of Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly and all of those others. But kind of like what's interesting is that the Beatles went through, I think, that whole sort of apprenticeship, of playing in Germany and sort of trying to imitate other people, until you get to the point where Paul McCartney now plays a 12-bar blues, and it doesn't, he's kind of like 60 years later, he's now got it, he's figured it out, and he's no longer trying to be another person, he's doing his own thing. And sort of that takes a lot of practice and learning and unlearning and relearning, which you can only get, through long experience. So, sort of, I think that, we all have to sort of try and go through that, but that's the artistry. And that's what it takes.
Absolutely.
Comes with age, Bill. Comes with age.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So look, I'm trying to sell myself here, because a lot of people would like to see me sort of just pass away quickly. But I'm actually trying to say that I've now reached the pinnacle of what it is that I'm trying to do, and that I should. Yeah.
Can I add this point?
Go on, Larry. Go.
I think we just got to remember recently, I think about in July, Paul McCartney was 80 or 81 years old, and he appeared in Glastonbury concert. That's amazing. Paul McCartney, as he aged, he's revered by the whole world today, and I think that's
Sir Paul McCartney.
Sir Paul McCartney, yes.
Indeed.
Right?
Sorry.
And Larry, we resumed our concert series at LT19A under the Dorothy Cheung Memorial Series with a pianist among a group of younger musicians who was 80 years young and still jamming. And it does beg the question of the value of age in society. Because certainly in the perspective of intellectuals, there is a sell-by date, whether you call it T62, T65, T55, whatever that is, and you're put out to pasture because it is assumed that you've not met institutional standards of holding up to something or somebody who is about half your age, because circumstances have changed. But in creative practice, how do you resolve that? We have people who are 70, 80, 90 years young who are still actively engaged in creative practice. Now, it also may be that in terms of their capacity to operate as 25-year-olds, that is bespoke. But what age has and what age brings to bear is also inversely proportional to the sense of insight that can be available.
Well, I think in the arts, age should be also seen by some people as a yardstick of achievement in their performances. I just quoted Paul McCartney. Stéphane Grappelli was playing till 90 years old. That's the great French violinist, Stéphane Grappelli. Mm-hmm. And I think that's I saw Zikovia when he was 92 years old in university days in the UK. So I think it's amazing that people came all over the world to watch all this. People admire such people because their great contribution in music as they mature, they grew in strength. And I think this is something we have to recognize in the arts, that the experience that carries along with the arts. Very important.
So does age suddenly find itself uncomfortably close to the discourse of eschatology?
Something I'm not sure what the eschatology means.
Well, you're one step closer to the coffin. Quit while you're ahead.
Oh, well, I think when we talk about the arts and death and all that should be just put aside. We just create music, and as I said before, you stop writing music and playing music when you can't take your last breath. Then you stop at your last breath. I think that's how I look at things, because music is always recreated, evolving, and it's really magical in the sense of love.
I think that's also true for all arts practitioners who have an active perspective on life. Chihu, you have a question.
Yes, Hi, Larry. Thank you. It's really inspirational. I'd like to hear about what else you're recreating and fusing at this point beyond 知不知道. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Thanks.
Well, I'm at the moment trying to look at South American music, and I'm trying to...
Where in South America, Larry? Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Peru?
Well, primarily, I'm looking at the folk tradition of South America in Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and also in Bolivia, because I play the charango, and I think it's really interesting to study this new area. Besides, if you want to call language as part of this extension of music, Mandarin. I'm still going on with my studies in Mandarin, and probably I'm going to explore more Chinese folk songs, which I'm keenly interested. I hope I've answered your question, Jihu.
Yusri, you had a question. You raised your hand, Yusri?
No, I didn't, sir. I just wanted to. Yeah, I didn't raise my hand. Sorry.
Yeah, please share if you want to.
No. No. I just wrote a message saying that I'm actually very inspired, very motivated by this conversation, because, I mean, we're talking about age and about not.
You don't look like an old man, do you?
Well, I'm not that young. I'm sure you. But I mean, recently I've been really getting the second wind kind of thing, and I really want to get to go and do my studies and everything. So, I mean, hearing yourselves, you know, in this conversation, I really feel like, okay, I should not even think twice about doing this, what I want to do, and I should just steam ahead. And because age is really it should not really matter if you're talking about the arts and music.
Yeah.
You should, you know, as long as you are like what Dr. Francis said about, you know, to the last breath, you know, just play music, enjoy music, make music, you know, until to the end. And I really agree with that. I really feel that, you know, that's how I see things as well. I don't believe there should be a limit to what we can do as long as we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's something else that occurs to me, which is kind of like the at the other end of the you know, sort of the time spectrum here, is that, you know, that there's because I have this with my daughter who is studying to be a singer. She gets told that she's too young to do things, right? And that kind of like makes me think, well, you know, then, you know, what are you trying to say? Is that, you know, there's an optimal age for you? You know, you can only start singing, you know, Handel or, you know, or whatever, you know, when you're 35. You know, why can't you start, you know, why can't you do these things, you know, sort of at any time? And that how in our society, you know, we do have these, you know, it's like, you know, it's kind of like it's a developmental, you know, sort of mindset grid. You know, yeah, absolutely. It's that thing. Is it, you know, you can't start doing things until you reach a certain age, which I think is something that we've got to fight against. So, Yusri, my you know, my encouragement to you is, if you feel as if you need to study, go and do it, man, because, you know, there's nothing stopping you whatsoever.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Phil. Absolutely.
You know, Phil, Stevie Wonder started when he was 10, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But
who said he was too young?
Well, I mean, certain people might have done that until they realized that he could make money for them, you know. So,
yes.
So that's the thing, you know. But the thing is other people get told that they can't do things because they're not old enough, and that seems to me, you know, especially for artists and like my daughter is you know, wants to be a musician and a performer, is that it's very demotivating and demoralizing, because there's no rational basis for it. If you can do these kinds of things, why shouldn't you have the opportunity to do it?
Exactly.
You know, Phil, you just made me think, because here, when we come back to institutional discourse, and I'm going back to the Stoic tradition, where a man or a human was considered to come of age from the ages of 60 to 80.
Yeah.
Anything below that was youth.
Yeah.
And when I got my PhD at 37 in 1997, what happened was there were two fellow PhD holders, one from the Chinese department and one from the Tamil department, who were twice my age. And you would be asking yourself, man, why would you want to wait till this seniority to get a PhD? It was no impediment to them.
Yeah. No, none whatsoever. There's a good question here from our colleague Tan Yang Chong, who says, you know, just imagine, you know, if do younger bands have, you know, a greater prospects than the older guys who are trying to do things?
Go on, Larry. This is your call.
Well, it depends, you know. I think we have to be honest about the arts. For example, some of the older chaps I've known have stagnated in their performances because they have taken it for granted. They have never made any attempt to read, write, create, and research about music. And the younger people are full of energy and full of new materials like the social media, the YouTube thingy. And I think it depends who you're talking to. There's some young musicians just want to play the 3-chord songs and they're happy imitating from the social media, YouTube tutorials. But I think the older musicians in Singapore, in particular in Singapore, tend to be sort of laid back and they don't make any attempt to improve or contribute beyond that comfort zone. Mostly prefer to semi-retire and just play what they played 50 years ago, but they play badly now. Maybe they were very good 50 years ago, but the young people are very impressive. The ones I've met, the ones who have aspirations, they were far more inspiring and amazing talent. And so to cut the long story short, I think it depends on the context and who they are.
You know, Larry, this is an interesting point that you raised because someone remembered in the International Society for Music Educators, Professor Keith Swanwick from the University of London, who actually challenged a speaker who claimed that he had 30 years experience, who asked him, did you have 30 years of experience doing the same thing for 30 years or different things across 30 years?
Yeah. So what makes Larry distinctive is that he's still learning and he still has a grand desire, to learn new things. And that's what drives him, keeps him going, if you like. Yeah, absolutely. But you can't come on to a show like this and talk about look, I've been playing the same music for the past 35 years. I mean, we would have all switched off. The thing is you have a story to tell, and that's what you were doing in the video, telling a story, performing a story, where you were talking about your learning journey, and the way I saw it was it wasn't something that just had a beginning, a middle, and some future end. It's actually a story that has multiple parts to it, and you can read it as a, if you like, as a narrative, that kind of like starts in the middle and it goes back 20 years, you jump forwards to the present time, you go back 30 years, you talk about what you might do in the future, you go back to when you were learning guitar from your uncle, and it kind of like you're going backwards and forwards all of the time. But what's keeping that going, is the undercurrent of the fact that you are continually learning in the situations that you're in.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I cannot share this point. I'd like to encourage not just musicians, but people who love the arts, painting and music and drama, to just continue and don't let age to control you. Let creativity to float you, and there you go. I think what has happened, we worry too much about age and creativity will die and you'll be less productive
it's
as
your
a performer.
Fault, Larry. You talked about injury.
Well, that sort of injury is a different form of injury. I'm talking about the social pressures of the psychological pressures of, oh, I'm old, I shouldn't be playing, and you should play and continue playing and creating. I think music is something very, 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 very powerful message of spirituality and love. So you're sharing your art. You're not playing to yourself only, but you're sharing your art and you're healing yourself to become even younger through that music processes. I think so. I mean, I'm just shooting my thoughts, just sharing with everybody.
On the T.S. Eliot note, you are the music while the music lasts, or you are the creator till the creating lasts. I think we should leave this there. It just remains for me to close off the session by thanking Chihu, who is head of CARE, VPA, who I should express my gratitude because it was he who gave me free license to explore the lighted mind and the injured self. And this is extremely important so that in the future, if there are difficult questions, we shouldn't run away from them. We should be pursuing them and making sure that we address and have a robust debate and discussion about these issues to help us come to terms with ourselves, whatever age we are, and what we hold and hold dear to us, and what value we bring to the table. So Chihu, thank you very much. To Paul Lincoln, head BPA, thank you very much for giving me the license to speak and sometimes speak out of turn, but there are issues here that sometimes are larger than life and institutions themselves. To all of you who came, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions, your care, your thought, and your comments.
Could I just add this?
Yes, go ahead.
The department, thank you for having me and the beautiful questions coming through like Phil and all the rest. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Have a wonderful weekend.
Good night.